Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, May 12th. The United States and China announced today that they are massively rolling back tariffs on each other's goods for 90 days. This is following a trade talk that happened in Geneva over the weekend. The breakthrough follows months of ratcheting up economic tensions between the world's two largest economies since U.S. President Donald Trump returned to office and launched an all-out trade war against almost all of Washington's partners and rivals. In a rare joint statement, the two governments said U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods would be reduced from 145% to 30%, while China would cut its levies on U.S. imports from 125% to 10%. The reductions will take place by May 14th and last, quote, for an initial period of 90 days.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and substantially moved down the tariff levels. Both sides on the reciprocal tariffs will move their tariffs down 115%. We had very robust discussions. Both sides showed great respect. It was a chance for me to meet the Chinese delegation. The vice premier I had previously had only a video call with. Ambassador Jameson was familiar with two of the other leaders on the delegation from his previous time. So there was very good personal interaction. Both countries represented their national interests very well. We concluded that we have shared interest, and we both have an interest in balanced trade.
When speaking to reporters this morning in the Oval Office, President Donald Trump discussed the agreement the U.S. has made with China.
In addition, yesterday we achieved a total reset with China after productive talks in Geneva. Both sides now agreed to reduce the tariffs imposed after April 2nd to 10% for 90 days as negotiators continue on the largest structural issues. And I want to tell you that a couple of things. First of all, that doesn't include the tariffs that are already on, that are our tariffs, and it doesn't include tariffs on cars, steel, aluminum, things such as that, or tariffs that may be imposed on pharmaceuticals, because we want to bring the pharmaceutical businesses back to the United States, and they're already starting to come back now based on tariffs. The talks in Geneva were very friendly. The relationship is very good. We're not looking to hurt China. China was being hurt very badly. They were closing up factories. They were having a lot of unrest. And they were very happy to be able to do something with us. And the relationship is very, very good. I'll speak to President Xi maybe at the end of the week. We have some other things we're doing.
U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra says that U.S. President Trump's tariffs on Canada may not be totally removed under a future trade agreement, but the two countries are on a path toward a stronger relationship. Pete Hoekstra, who serves as Mr. Trump's envoy to Canada, says that there are opportunities to secure new economic and security partnerships on the foundation set by Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to the White House last week. However, Mr. Hoekstra said that Canada should expect some level of tariffs on its exports under a new trade deal, even a rate lower than the ones it currently faces. And in the Oval Office, President Trump stated that there will be an earth-shattering announcement between Canada and the U.S., but it's not trade.
You know, I said before in our meeting with the new and very talented Prime Minister of Canada that we have some very big announcement to make. It's not about trade. It's about something else, but it's going to be a truly earth-shattering and positive development for this country and for the people of this country. And that'll take place sometime within the next few days.
Hamas says it has released Israeli-American hostage Edon Alexander. The Israeli military confirmed that Mr. Alexander was turned over to the Red Cross today and was being brought to Israeli forces. Hamas announced on Sunday night that it had agreed to free the 21-year-old after several days of talks with the United States as part of an effort to reach a ceasefire and resume the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. The release comes just one day before Donald Trump begins a Middle East tour, with stops planned in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. In the Oval Office this morning, President Trump discussed the release of Mr. Alexander.
And third, I'm very happy to announce that Idan Alexander, an American citizen who until recently most thought was no longer living, thought was dead, is going to be released in about 2 hours, actually. And he's going to be released before the eyes of Steve Witkoff, who has done a fantastic job. I know a lot of people that have a lot of talent. I know Steve had a lot of talent. But I know a lot of people with a lot of talent, but there's one that I thought had a special way about him, special personality. Aside from being a good deal maker, had a special way about him, and it was Steve. Knew very little about the subject matter, who does? But he learned it in about 2 hours. And he's been fantastic, so I want to just thank Steve. But they're going to be releasing Idan in about 2 hours from now, or sometime today, let's say. And again, they thought he was dead just a short while ago. His parents are so happy. They're so happy. So it's, as you know, Idan's the only American citizen who's captured and held hostage by Hamas since October 7th, 2023. And he's coming home to his parents, which is really great news. I mean, to me, it's big news.
Mr. Alexander is an Israeli-American soldier who grew up in the United States. And this morning, a spokesperson for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu discussed the latest on the release.
Next, today, we expect the release of IDF soldier Idan Alexander, who was brutally abducted by the Hamas terror organization and held hostage in Gaza for 584 days. We will let you know news as soon as we have it. His return, without any concession in exchange, is a direct result of the relentless military pressure exerted by our brave IDF forces and the firm, principled policy led by this country and this government in partnership with our US allies. For clarity, Israel has not agreed to any ceasefire nor the release of terrorists. We have committed only to a temporary humanitarian corridor to facilitate Idan's safe return. Hamas have made this release as a gesture to our American allies. Now I can share with you that we are in the midst of critical days. A serious, credible proposal is now on the table, a deal that would bring all of our hostages home. Israel has accepted the Witkoff framework. Hamas continues to reject it. Meanwhile, with the return of Idan, 58 hostages, both the living and the deceased, remain in Hamas captivity, held for over a year and a half since the horrific massacre of October 7th. Our fight to bring them home continues with force, with diplomacy, and with our unshakable commitment to every Israeli citizen.
The Prime Minister's spokesperson also discussed Israel's relationship with the United States.
I can also share with you that the alliance between Israel and the United States is stronger than ever. It's rooted in shared values and a common resolve to defeat Hamas and to restore security and humanity to our region. Look, I think Israel's relationship with the US is the result of years of partnership, years of sharing the same worldview, of sharing the same enemies, of sharing the same aspirations as well for a more peaceful future. So I don't recognize that description whatsoever. When it comes to Iran, you specifically asked about Iran. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, together with the overwhelming, the majority, everyone here in Israel, believes that it is simply not an option, that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That is the US policy. That is President Trump has said that very, very clearly, as is our Prime Minister, who has spent decades on that mission to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power, to prevent it from becoming a nuclear weapons power. The US and Israel share that objective. Now, many in the media would like to make lots of fuss about all sorts of things. Our objectives remain precisely the same.
International Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc says that Canada has no reason to think the United States wants to trigger an early review of the North American Free Trade Deal. But American officials do want to discuss tackling economic and security issues together. Mr. LeBlanc's comments come days after Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office and for a working lunch in the Roosevelt Room. The international trade minister accompanied Mr. Carney on the trip to Washington. And according to a senior Canadian official, Mr. Carney told Mr. Trump that any trade deal for Canada must include the U.S. lifting its tariffs on Canadian goods. U.S. stock futures surged after President Donald Trump's top trade officials brokered a surprisingly dramatic de-escalation in trade tensions with China over the weekend, dropping tariffs to much lower levels, which some economists say could prevent a U.S. recession. Dow futures rose 1,000 points or 2.4%. S&P 500 futures were 3.1% higher, and NASDAQ futures gained 4%. U.S. stocks were set to erase all their losses since Mr. Trump's April 2nd Liberation Day trade announcement, which placed a 10% tariff on practically all goods coming into the United States and set significantly higher tariffs on dozens of countries. And while it might seem like something only investors or large companies are involved in, the stock market actually plays a role in the broader economy that affects all Canadians, from job creation to personal wealth building opportunities. Canada's stock exchange, particularly the Toronto Stock Exchange, is one of the most active in the world and home to many of the country's leading businesses. But how exactly does the stock exchange help grow the economy? Can it support a stronger middle class? And what role does it play in a democratic society? Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited, joins us now to unpack this. Brendan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Teresa. Let's do it.
Now, Canada has a functional stock exchange. How could Canadians use the stock exchanges to grow the economy?
Well, when I say functional, I think I would take it to mean by that the value of the companies listed on the exchange is actually even bigger than the Canadian economy. It's not a bad yardstick by which to measure whether a country is got much broader participation in the wealth creation or whether that wealth is concentrated. So countries like, I don't know, Mexico or Russia or China, most of the economy is privately held, or at least not held publicly by the broader population, by investors generally. But in Canada, the United States, even India, the market capitalization of the exchanges is actually bigger than the economy, which is one way of measuring whether there is a broad participation. And why it's important is the more people are participating in the stock exchange, the greater the benefits of wealth creation. We have a country like Mexico, which is famous for its 100 families, or Bermuda with 40 thieves, which is the 40 families that really own most of the island. You have wealth concentration in a very, very few hands. But if you think of places like Russia, you think of oligarchs, where the wealth is not broadly dispersed, but highly concentrated. So the more people participate in the stock exchange by buying either directly in owning shares of companies or indirectly through mutual funds or exchange traded funds, the more they're participating, the more broadly the wealth creation engine benefits society.
And how do stock exchanges create a stronger middle class?
Oh, well, they are profoundly democratic institutions, exchanges are. Probably the most democratic institution that the world has ever come up with, because they allow for the free expression of capital. So if an entrepreneur has an idea, it's a good idea, and he takes it to the stock exchange, it could be a mine, it could be a technology idea, it could be a healthcare idea, It could be a wonder drug. It could be lots of different things. He takes to the stock exchange in the form of a corporation, and people vote with their money on that idea. Now, if that idea is good enough, if it's the next Shopify, to use a Canadian example, that goes from an idea to a multi-hundred-billion-dollar corporation, and people are able to participate along with the entrepreneur with that idea, then not only does he get rich, but everybody is better off around him. And if my success as an investor is predicated on some great entrepreneur, I mean, think about a Steve Jobs, God rest his soul, or a Mark Zuckerberg, or a Bill Gates, or even an Elon Musk, to the extent that they're doing well predicates my doing well, it does create for a much greater degree of social cohesion, because otherwise you don't have an opportunity as an individual to buy into a national dream, buy into the Canadian dream, if you will.
And what is the significance of a stock exchange in a democracy?
Well, the middle class actually has the biggest stake in the survival of democracy. And it was really the middle class in United States that got that going. Responsible government here in Canada was the work of the middle class. The very wealthy would prefer an oligarchy of some description. You see that in places like Russia. In the very poor would rather people just take care of them. So some sort of socialist something is better for them. But the middle class is the one that has the biggest interest in having a middle class. So in having a democracy. So if you can build a middle class through allowing them to own the nation's best ideas, in the case of Canada, to own pieces of our telecommunications companies, our banks, our railroads, our mines, our airlines, our technology and healthcare companies, our industrial companies. If individuals own a stake in all that, that creates wealth, because ownership creates wealth. Having money in the bank doesn't create wealth. It just sits there, especially with today's interest rates. But owning a piece of a business over time, with all the ups and downs of the stock market, that money can grow.
And people often refer to exchanges as a casino. Is this true?
I think exchanges and casinos are really the comparison is very superficial. Both investors and gamblers are predicting a certain outcome, and they put their money down based on that outcome, and both can get very emotional. But I think that's where the comparison ends. With a casino, the odds are always with the house. The longer you bet, the more likely you are to lose. Investing is completely the opposite. The longer you invest, the more likely you are to make money. Anything could happen in the short term, but as the economy grows and the stock market grows, and just look at the history of stock market indices over the last number of decades. Oh, there have been ups and downs, but even the biggest bear markets, even the biggest corrections, don't look like much with the benefit of time. And the other thing is that casinos they're a zero-sum game. Nobody net makes any money, except perhaps the casino, or let us to say, for any winner, there is a loser. Stock exchanges, again, are the opposite. I can buy a stock, it can do well. I can sell it to somebody else, it can continue to do well. Wealth actually gets created. Casinos create nothing except misery.
And what stands out most to you in the strong companies that you choose to invest in?
Well, every investor has their own way of tackling it, and there's not a single right way. What we try and do is have some complementary strategies that work best in each market. For example, in Canada, we focus on companies that are showing positive momentum, both in terms of price and earnings. With the median analyst, if she re-rates a company higher, if there's some catalyst for that company to start doing well, so we focus on the momentum, and then we combine that with value, so that the companies that we think have good fundamental characteristics that the investing world is just starting to notice, just at that, well, most Canadian of analogies, the curve of the hockey stick. In the US, we tend to focus on companies that have the ability to grow their dividends. dividend growers just by far outperform over time in the U.S. compared to anything else. And internationally, we're really partnered with a New York firm called Lazard to invest in companies that are building out the infrastructure, both traditional infrastructure and the modern infrastructure that'll power the electronic economy that is already seeing burgeoning around the world.
Now, we do just have about a minute left, but as I mentioned earlier, China and the U.S. have agreed to kind of take a step back with their tariffs, and economists are saying that this could really help avoid an American recession. Do you agree with this?
Well, I agree that free trade has been the best thing for the world, and we've seen in my lifetime hundreds and hundreds of millions of people dragged out of poverty by the fact that the free flow of goods and services across borders has helped so many people. So yes, I think a lower tariff environment is good for all economies, and a free trade environment is the best world of all. So it is heartening to hear that China and the U.S. is getting that sorted out. I've long felt that we should not overreact to Mr. Trump's proclamations because, like the weather here in Toronto in the spring, just wait. Something new will come along that you like better.
Brendan, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Teresa.
After a judicial recount, the Quebec riding of Terrebonne has flipped to the Liberals, who have beaten the Bloc Québécois by 1 vote. The results mean that the Liberals have 170 seats in the House of Commons, just 2 shy of a majority government. On Wednesday, the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada announced the judicial recount after results showed incumbent Bloc Québécois MP Nathalie Sinclair de Gagné beat her Liberal challenger by 44 votes. Our correspondent Wyatt Sharp joined us to unpack the recount.
On election night, the Liberal candidate in the riding of Terrebonne in the province of Quebec emerged victorious, managing to squeak by just a couple of votes. But after a recount, the Bloc Québécois candidate, Nathalie Sinclair de Gagné, it looked as if she actually had managed to squeak by. And then after that, the Liberal candidate actually protested that for a third time through what's called a judicial review, which is something that ridings have kind of the ability to do in scenarios where it really is super close with these kind of razor-thin margins as we are seeing here, which ultimately has resulted in the Liberal candidate in that riding winning by just 1 vote. Now, I can't think of a more recent example, when something along these lines has occurred, and certainly it is going to create kind of an interesting dynamic, given the threshold for a majority government in the House of Commons is, of course, 172 seats. The Liberals on election night, when it was looking as if the Bloc Québécois was going to win that seat, was at 169 seats. Now with this riding, it's looking like they could be at 170 seats potentially. Now, interestingly enough, there is still another riding where it is possible that the Liberals could come out on top after a recount, kind of a similar scenario to what we saw play out here, albeit it's not quite as close as Terrebonne was, but certainly that's an interesting kind of point to mention. That would then bring the Liberals up to 171 seats. And then after that, really, now they're only 1 seat away from the majority threshold, which could simply mean maybe convincing the likes of Elizabeth May or potentially an NDP MP, of which there's not very many, of course, only 7 of them in the House of Commons right now, to join the Liberal ranks. Then that would kind of solidify them the ability to have a majority government, which would, of course, create for more stable governance for the Liberal Party over the course of the next 4 years. They would be able to pass kind of their agenda without having that uncertainty of whether or not the NDP or the Bloc Québécois would hold the balance of power to ultimately allow them to pass some of the agenda items that they are looking to get passed. Certainly, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the course of the next little while and over the course of the next few weeks as well, especially just given kind of how Parliament is going to be taking shape. You have the announcement, for example, of Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet that's going to be coming out tomorrow. Elizabeth May saying she would actually consider switching over to the Liberal Party if Mark Carney would guarantee her a cabinet position or perhaps support her in her bid to become Speaker of the House of Commons. So certainly it's kind of a game of quid pro quo, if you will. One person wants something in exchange for joining the party. But Mark Carney, if that could again solidify the ability for him to have a majority government, people are telling me that he has his eyes wide open at this point and he's not closing the door to any possible option.
In late April, Ontario Premier Doug Ford claimed that Canada's politically appointed judiciary is overstepping its authority and that judges should be elected so that they are more responsive to the will of the people.
Just 2 months ago, our government received a strong mandate from the people of Ontario to make sure that we protect Ontario. It's a mandate to protect our workers and businesses from tariffs and economic uncertainty. But it's also a mandate to protect our communities and make our streets safe. Because right now, the federal government's broken bail system is letting far too many criminals back onto the streets just days or even hours right after being arrested. Enough is enough. At the provincial level, we are doing everything in our power to strengthen bail and keep criminals off the streets. We launched new bail teams made up of special prosecutors just over a year ago, and they're already producing real results. These teams have been involved in more than 3,000 cases, helping keep people accused of serious crimes behind bars and helping resolve these cases faster than ever before. That's why today we're making them permanent with dedicated, intensive, serious, violent crime bail teams across Ontario. You know, I'm just, there's so many great judges, first of all, and there's great JPs. I'm a strong believer in our judicial system, but it's out of control now. Like you see these criminals getting out on bail, not once or twice, 4 or 5 times, and going out and committing heinous crimes. There's a story that someone was out on bail 5 times and went and killed a young lady. You know, this is absolutely ridiculous how these judges keep letting people out over and over and over again. I'm just done with it.
Our correspondent Adam Zivo has more on the debate.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford recently blasted Canada's judiciary and argued that some provincial judges are too soft on crime and too eager to engage in judicial activism that undermines his democratic mandate. He suggested that this problem could be fixed by adopting a U.S.-style system where judges are elected, not politically appointed. In response, critics have claimed that his comments undermine judicial independence and that electing judges would be a terrible idea. Their position is not unreasonable because when judges are beholden to the interests of donors and political supporters, that inevitably increases the risk of biased rulings. In the United States, for example, special interest groups sometimes spend millions of dollars installing judges who support their causes. Worse yet, some judicial elections have developed into nakedly partisan affairs. Both of these problems naturally undermine the public's faith in the law, so it's unclear why Canada should adopt such a system, especially if doing so requires a messy rewrite of the Constitution. This doesn't mean that the current system is perfect. As of now, the federal government appoints every judge who works in either the federal courts or the upper-level provincial courts. While these appointments should, ideally, be politically neutral, in practice they often are not. Over time, it's possible for a federal government to stack these courts with ideological allies, leaving no democratic recourse, which is seemingly what has happened under 10 years of liberal rule. And so, while Ford is wrong to advocate for judicial elections, he is right to a certain degree in his diagnosis of the status quo. Our judges are too ideological and they do not reliably represent the public's interests. That being said, there are some important caveats to keep in mind. Ford argues that judges grant bail too easily and are unwilling to impose harsh sentences upon violent or repeat criminals. He says that this has created a broken catch-and-release justice system that fails to keep the public safe. That's a fair criticism, but not one that should be fully absorbed by the judiciary. Yes, some politically appointed judges fail to take crime seriously, but bail and sentencing norms are strongly influenced by federal law. The Liberals, unfortunately, passed several pieces of legislation that reduced sentencing requirements and made bail incredibly accessible for dangerous criminals. So if Ford has a problem with the justice system in this respect, he should lodge his complaints with Prime Minister Mark Carney, not the courts. But the situation is different when it comes to judicial overreach and interference into Ford's democratic agenda. That's because, in recent years, there has been a troubling rise in court rulings that use specious charter arguments to intrude upon policy debates that should, ideally, be resolved in a democratic arena. For example, in early 2024, the BC Supreme Court ruled on a temporary basis that the province cannot prohibit public drug use unless every addict has access to an overdose prevention site. The presiding judge, Chief Justice Christopher Hinkson, seemed eager to use flimsy evidence to invent this charter right out of nowhere. Similarly, late last year, Ontario Superior Court Judge Michael Valent questionably determined that municipalities cannot clear out homeless encampments unless they provide shelter spaces where open drug use is permitted. The ruling seemed designed to coerce municipal governments into dramatically changing how their homeless shelters operate without democratic buy-in, even though the judge had no real mandate to impose such changes. Valente's ruling was later indirectly criticized by another Ontario Superior Court judge, James Ramsey, who, upon ruling on a similar case, noted that such issues are best determined by voters and that micromanagement by judges will not be productive. When the Ford government passed legislation to tear up Toronto's 3 main bike lanes late last year, they were thwarted by yet another Ontario Superior Court judge, Paul Shabbos, who determined this April that cyclists may have a charter right to such infrastructure. Regardless of how one feels about cycling, and I say this as an avid biker, it seems far-fetched to imagine that access to bike lanes should be guaranteed as a fundamental right. Here's the problem. Canada's courts are supposed to respect the separation of powers, lest they usurp the authority of Parliament and the provincial legislatures. But when judges use fabricated charter rights to unilaterally impose open drug use and bike lanes, regardless of voter preferences, that respect seems to be missing. And so while it may be true that we should not elect our judges, because that probably wouldn't fix anything and could just make the situation worse, it is also true that there is something terribly wrong with the current system. In this way, Ford is half right about this issue.
India says that its strikes into Pakistan-controlled Kashmir and Pakistan on Wednesday killed more than 100 militants. Residents and officials in the disputed Kashmir region say there was overnight fighting between Pakistani and Indian troops despite a ceasefire, but the clashes calmed by Sunday morning.
Following these relentless attacks on our air bases, on our forward positions, and on our civilian targets, this was time to convey some message to our adversaries. And therefore, a decision was taken to strike where it would hurt. And towards that, in a swift, coordinated, calibrated attack, we struck his air bases, command centers, military infrastructure, air defense systems across the entire Western Front. The bases we struck include Chaklala, Rafiki, and mind you, Chaklala is Islamabad.
As part of the ceasefire, the nuclear-armed neighbors agreed to immediately stop all military action on land, in the air, and at sea. They accused each other of repeatedly violating the deal hours later. This morning, President Trump discussed the ceasefire between India and Pakistan and how big of a role the U.S. played in this agreement.
Again, let me say a few words about the historic events that took place over the last few days. On Saturday, my administration helped broker a full and immediate ceasefire, I think a permanent one, between India and Pakistan, ending a dangerous conflict of two nations with lots of nuclear weapons. And they were going at it hot and heavy, and it was seemingly not going to stop. And I'm very proud to let you know that the leadership of India and Pakistan was unwavering, powerful, but unwavering in both cases, and having these, they really were, from the standpoint of having the strength and the wisdom and fortitude to fully know and to understand the gravity of the situation. And we helped a lot. And we helped also with trade. I said, come on, we're going to do a lot of trade with you guys. Let's stop it. Let's stop it. If you stop it, we're doing trade. If you don't stop it, we're not going to do any trade. People have never really used trade the way I used it. That I can tell you. And all of a sudden they said, I think we're going to stop.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has challenged Vladimir Putin to meet him in Turkey on Thursday. It's the latest move in a weekend-long exchange of proposals on the next step in the U.S.-led peace effort. President Trump called Thursday's meeting between the two leaders very important.
On Thursday's meeting with Russia and Ukraine is very important. I was very insistent that that meeting take place. I think good things can come out of that meeting. Stop the bloodshed of the horrible, it's a bloodbath. But that 5,000 more, it's really much more, I'm trying to be conservative, more than 5,000 soldiers. Russian, they're not American soldiers, they're from Russia, they're from Ukraine, but they're people.
Mr. Zelensky said that he still hopes for a ceasefire with Russia and that he will be waiting for Putin in Turkey personally after Donald Trump insisted Ukraine accept Russia's latest offer to hold direct talks in Turkey. Ukraine, along with European allies, had demanded Russia accept an unconditional 30-day ceasefire before holding talks, but Moscow effectively rejected the proposal. President Donald Trump said Sunday night that the Defense Department plans to accept a Boeing 747-8 jet to replace Air Force One as a gift free of charge. In a post on Truth Social, Mr. Trump said the multi-million-dollar jet would be used on a temporary basis in a very public and transparent transaction. Mr. Trump is set to embark on his first major foreign trip, which includes a stop in Doha, Qatar. While speaking to reporters in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump called the jet from Qatar a great gesture.
And it's going to be a while before we get them. And I think Qatar, who has really, we've helped them a lot over the years in terms of security and safety. I think they, and very, very nicely, and I have a lot of respect for the leadership and for the leader, Qatar. And I think they knew about it because they buy Boeings. They buy a lot of Boeings. And they knew about it. And they said, we would like to do something. And if we can get a 747 as a contribution to our Defense Department to use during a couple of years while they're building the other ones, I think that was a very nice gesture. Now, I could be a stupid person and say, oh, no, we don't want a free plane. We give free things out. We'll take one, too. And it helps us out because, again, we're talking about we have 40-year-old aircraft. The money we spend, the maintenance we spend on those planes to keep them tippy-top is astronomical. You wouldn't even believe it. So I think it's a great gesture from Qatar. I appreciate it very much. I would never be one to turn down that kind of an offer.
Statistics Canada says that preliminary figures for April continue to point to a sharp drop in return trips from the United States by Canadian residents. The agency says the number of Canadian residents returning by automobile from the U.S. in April fell on a year-over-year basis for the fourth consecutive month as it dropped 35.2% to 1.2 million. Canadians have canceled trips to the U.S. in the wake of U.S. President Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods and his desire for Canada to become the 51st state. Canadian residents returning by air from the United States in April totaled 582,700, down 19.9% from a year ago. Star female pitcher Ayami Sato made history as the first woman to play in a Canadian men's professional baseball league on Sunday. She also had a perfect debut for the Intercounty Baseball League's Toronto Maple Leafs. Sato struck out one batter without allowing anyone on base in the first two innings of an eventual 6-5 loss to the Kitchener Panthers.
Pitch of the season from Sato, and that's a weak tapper back to the mound. Sato fields it, throws to first in time for out number one. How about that? One pitch, one out. Sato, welcome to the Intercounty Baseball League. Back here with the Toronto Maple Leafs at first base. This one's hit on the ground. This one's to Dan Mara. Flips to first for out number two. Yes, talking to Justin Mara about Sato after catching her for the first time this week, and he said that curveball, it really plays. And the fact that it's a bit slower as well really gets the hitters off balance, and The same can be said for this one. Popped up on the infield, 1-2-3. Ayami Sato fired up as she heads back to the Maple Leafs dugout. How about that? What a start for Ayami.
Widely considered the top female pitcher in baseball, the 35-year-old from Japan signed with the Maple Leafs in December to become the IBL's first female player. And over to the PWHL, Catherine Dubois scored in the fourth overtime to lift the Montreal Victoire to a 3-2 playoff victory over the Ottawa Charge on Sunday afternoon.
That's important numbers all of the time. Just over 4 minutes remaining in this overtime. 2 full games in another period here. When you add it all up, Dubois scores! The Quebec native makes history as the Victoire take down the Charge in overtime.
Dubois spoke to reporters following the Victoires' OT win.
So leading up to that goal, your feeling when the puck went in the net?
Like I said in French, I'm to be quite honest, I think I black out. I don't remember anything except the girls coming to me and celebrating. So I'm just very happy that we won this game, and it was a team winning game. Like we played all together, and it's just fun to win hockey games. So I'm just happy. I'm happy.
The game set a Canadian professional women's hockey record for the longest hockey game ever, passing the Canadian Women's Hockey League semifinal on March 18, 2018. The previous longest professional women's hockey league game was played exactly a year ago between Montreal and Boston. And over to the NHL, the Florida Panthers bounced back in a big way on Sunday, defeating the Toronto Maple Leafs 2-0 in Game 4 of their Eastern Conference second-round series. Goaltender Sergei Bobrovsky delivered a stellar performance, stopping all 23 shots he faced to earn his 5th career playoff shutout. Carter Verhaeghe and Sam Bennett provided the offense.
Hagee, Bennett drags it, moves it, he scores! What a goal! Sam Bennett brings the house down, 2-0, Florida.
And in the Western Conference, the Edmonton Oilers suffered a devastating 4-3 loss to the Vegas Golden Knights in Game 3 on Saturday. But tonight, Edmonton welcomes the Golden Knights to Rogers Place and what they call a must-win for the Oilers. Oilers head coach Chris Knobloch spoke to reporters about the importance of tonight's game.
What we had, I think that game could have went either way, and it got to the point where it almost went either way. But collectively, we know we need to be better for the next game and Game 5 because we know that we have a lot of respect for Vegas. They're a good team, well coached, a lot of veteran players, and they play a good, solid game. So it's not ever going to be easy.
I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.